C shape, C chord, pentatonic, and major scale position 4 or C. Get ready because we're about to rock and or roll. Here we are in our worksheet looking at the C chord shape, remembering that the tablature represents the top string on top, that being the low or heavy E string, as opposed to the skinny E string, which is going to be on the bottom, the 0 representing the open strings, the ones that we're not going to be fingering. We're not going to be putting our fingers down on, say, these items. Instead, we're trying not to mute those items to let the open positions ring out. Then we're going to be starting to put our fingers down where we're told to put the fingers down on frets 1, 2, 3, and so on. This is a common C shape position here. If you were to see that C shape on the guitar, it would look something like this. So this would be the common C shape type of position. Notice we have basically 3 fingers down here, fingering 3 strings, and then we've got the open position on the other 2. So let's analyze this position. This position means this is going to be the root of the position. That's going to be the one that will define that it is a C type of chord. When you move this full position up, if you were to move this position up to the D, then you're going to see that it's a C shape. You're going to memorize that it's a C shape because everybody has that drilled into their mind. But this top item here on the A string, where your finger lies, can help determine where your position is as you move up the fretboard. So the starting point is that's going to be the root. Note that that's not the only C in the chord. We have other C's down here. You might say, hey, why is that C right there going to be the root of the chord? You might say, well, because it's the lowest note. It's on the top string, and that means it's going to be possibly the lowest note. And that is often the case when you think about constructing the chords. You often start out with the lowest note being kind of the root of the chord, but that's not necessarily the case, because what the chord shape or the chord itself has 3 notes in it does not necessarily have to have the lowest note being the root note. So you can position those differently. Also note that as we construct this, you'll see that when we talk about a chord, we're talking about 3 notes, and we are having more than 3 strings that are ringing out. We're having this one ring out. We're not touching the A here, the E. You could mute the E, and then we've got the A string, which we're holding down the 3rd fret, which is going to be the C. We got the D string. We're holding down the 2nd fret, which is the E. We're leaving open, not fingering anything on the open G chord, and then on the open G string. And then we've got the B string, which is going to be towards the floor, second to the bottom string of the floor. On the skinnier strings, we are holding down the C, and then we're leaving open that bottom E, the high E, the string closest to the floor. So that's going to be a common position that we will then learn. Let's kind of break this down with regards to our music theory with regards to it. If I was to take my full musical alphabet, including the sharps and flats and so on, and I was to copy from C to C and just put this on down here from C to C, and then apply my whole half progression that we will apply to the major scale, we would go from C, a whole step to D, a whole step to E, a half step to F, a whole step then to G, a whole step to A whole step to B, and then the half step resolves back to the C here. If we were to break that out, then we're going to have our scale in C, which was just going to be no sharps, no flats, but C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. If we number those notes, remember you can number them and say that it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you were then to try to make a song in the key of C, then typically the major and minor chords, you're going to take those same notes and apply major for the C, minor for the D, minor for the E, major for the F, major for the V, minor for the A, and then you got a diminished 7. Oftentimes people for almost all popular songs kind of like just leave out the 7th and just work with the first 6, and then it's going to go back to the 1 on the C, which would then be the major. Note that one of the easiest progressions most people will learn is going to be the 1, 4, 5, which you can see here are the major chords in the progressions. Many common songs, many will kind of fall into that basically progression. So that's going to be the breakout. Now, if I look on over here, if I try to build a chord, then the chord is going to be starting at the C, and all we do is take this scale and skip every note. So I'm going to start at the C, which is going to be the root. I'm going to skip 1 and go to the E, and then I'm going to skip 1 and I'm going to go to the G. So that means that this this major chord is made up of C's, E's, and G's. C's, E's, and G's. So that means that this position isn't really a C position itself, because I can move this position up and now have a D chord. This is a C chord, not because of the positioning of my hand, although everybody learns that, because when you're learning, that's just what you have to do. Your mind's just stuck with that. That's a C shape. So you're going to memorize that as a C shape. But remember, once you do that, you can use that C shape to then be able to distinguish it's a C shape in the open position, which if I moved up would still be a C shape in my mind, but it would now be a D chord because you would have different chords. So in other words, if I analyzed this shape, we've got the C's in here, we then have an E, we have a G, but then we have another C and we have another E. So we have C, E, and G in place, but instead of just having 3 strings that are ringing out, we actually have more than 3 strings that are ringing out. We've got 5 strings ringing out, and that's okay. It's still just a plain old, C major chord, because all 5 of those strings ringing out are just repeats of the same notes involved. Now, they're going to have different octaves and different voicings. That's why it's really nice that you can finger this same chord in different areas. This nice open position usually gives you the fullest feel, because you can usually ring out the most kind of strings here, and they're going to be the deepest notes because they're more towards the bass. They're going to be the fullest kind of sound in those open positions. But anytime you can basically get those 3, all you need is 3 notes, and you're in that chord. So that's useful. That's a useful thing to know. So now again, you can move that shape up. We'll talk about that next time. But if you're using this to play along with a song, then obviously the open position is usually the positions that you can use for the chords of the song. But if someone else is playing the chords and you don't want to do the same thing, then you can use this position to arpeggiate. So you can now say, I'm going to start playing notes that are in, the C arpeggio or the C chord. That's kind of one of the safest things that you can do. And you could do that by playing over the song. And let's say the song is in a 1-4-5. You can do that by trying to switch from positions from a C to an F to a G and the 1-4-5 on the progression of the song. Or you could say, I'm just going to stick with the C here, and I'm just going to try to play notes that are in basically the C. I'm going to arpeggiate, or I'm going to kind of switch up the ordering of the notes that are basically in a C major. That's kind of the safest thing to do. So now we can tie in, well, how does this tie into basically the pentatonic scales? Notice that I labeled this P4, and it's a C position. So if I look at my pentatonic scales, this will actually lay on top of the 4th position. This is where it starts over, which will also be here. So this is what I would call position 4, and we'll basically lay on top of this the C shape. So let's see what that'll look like. We're gonna do that by going to the right here. I'm gonna unhide some cells to see. So here we have it. So now we've got what I would call that position 4 that is now going to be moved into this position. Now note, when I look at position 4 over here, when I based it on our pentatonic scales, I started basically in the key of C in the middle position here, which would be like a G type of position. Position 4 was down here, moving it back. So this is the starting position. That was what I would be calling basically position 4. So that's where I'm getting, position 4 here, because I'm basing it on these positions, which I basically start to learn, as many people do, by putting the bass here on this kind of major rock and roll kind of pentatonic scale, which they often learn at the 5th fret, which is actually a C scale. It's a C major pentatonic scale. So if I then go back on over here and say, okay, well, if I take that same position right here, which I would call, position 4, I can also name that position, that pentatonic position, and many people see it this way as a C chord kind of pentatonic position, because the C chord fits inside of that pentatonic position. And if you see that, if you label it that way, that's one way that you might label the pentatonic scale. Many people will start to label these shapes by saying this is a C shape that I'm playing in the C position, or a C shape that I'm playing in a D position, which can help you to pinpoint where you are on the fretboard. That's one way that you can think about the shapes. if you think about that with the shapes, you can also use that to name the scale structure. I could then say this is my C shape pentatonic scale, even though the C shape is only 3 notes and the pentatonic scale is 5. But this will show you where home is. You can see that this is going to be the C shape, telling you that this note right here represents the scale that the scale is in, the note that the scale is in, and then you can expand it to the full pentatonic position. And then when I move this whole position up, I can just say, well, now my C shape fits inside of it. So this is a C shape in the key of D for the shape. And I can also extend that to the pentatonic shape. I could say this is a C shape in the key of D, which is also a pentatonic. I'm going to call it the pentatonic shape in the key of D. That's another naming convention. And again, these are just conventions that you can use. Other people use different conventions to try to organize in their mind, where they are on the fretboard. So if I was to add this, I was to overlay this, now we can arpeggiate. If I was to play along with a song, we would say, all right, now I've got the C. If they're playing a 1-4-5, I can arpeggiate the orange notes, and then I can expand to the notes in the pentatonic scale. If I was to look at that in terms of our theory here, we're going to say, all right, now I've got my scale from C to C, which are no sharps and flats. They're playing the 1-4-5 here. The safest thing for me to do would be to arpeggiate within the notes in the C major chord, which would be a C, E, and G. And I can then add on to that the pentatonic scale, which would add on the D and the A. So those are other 2 notes that we can play around. And as long as I'm kind of playing around and I know that I'm in the key of C, the song's in the key of C, and I'm using this kind of C or this C as my home base that I kind of return to fairly often, then I'm usually going to be sounding like I'm going along with the progression. I'm in the flow. I'm in the rhythm here. And so next we can add then the major scale here. Now this first item represents our same concept of looking at the pentatonic scale in my positions, as I would say this is the home position, position 1, but now I've added the light notes, which now represent the pentatonic in dark blue, and then the light notes represent the major scales that would be added on. You could think of that, putting them on top, and this would be the major 1 through 5 positions, similar to what we started with over on the far left when we thought about just the pentatonic scale here. So now if I add then my C, so now I can look at this position again, and I can say, okay, now I can call this my C position, my C shape in the C position, which is the open C, which I can also label as my pentatonic, my C shape pentatonic in the key of C, which I can also use to label the whole scale, which is going to be the major scale, because the major scale fits on that as well. So when I start to move up and I'm trying to find where my scales are, I could use this shape. I can say, okay, I'm going to move this shape up to the D. So I know because this note here is a D, that's now the C shape in the D chord position. And what's on top of that D chord position, usually within 4 to 5 frets, you can finger everything in the 4 to 5 frets. That's going to be then in this shape is going to be your C shape D chord pentatonic shape, as well as your C shape D chord major scale. So you can basically expand and you can use this as your anchoring point to move up. So your goal here is not simply to move up this shape and be able to refinger just the shape so you can play the chord have a new way to play the D, but you can use it as an anchoring point to then be able to arpeggiate different notes, play different things on top of it, and then use it as a reference point for your scale, which is going to be your pentatonic scale, and then your major scale on top of that. Obviously, all we did here when we look at this position is we said, okay, we've got our major scale, which is no sharps and flats, and then we have now just included all the notes in the major scale. And notice how all the notes are now they all fall within 1 to 5 frets. You can find basically everything you need without moving your position of your hand. When you move up the fretboard, then you can find all the notes in the next, position, the 4 to 5 positions typically, but then you'll be at a higher octave, so the voicing will be different. That's why it's nice to be able to move up the fretboard, even though you have the same notes represented again and again in the fretboard. The voicings of them, combinations, will be different, and that's what's nice. So if someone is playing, if someone's playing in the key of C now, if we were to represent this theory, and they're playing the 1, 4, 5, a C, F, and a G, and I wanted to stay in one scale and not move my voicings from a C to E to F to G and just stay in the C, I can say I'm not going to just play the same chords because that's not adding really anything new. I could then say, well, maybe I'll arpeggiate, the safest thing to do within the chords C, E, and G, or maybe I can use my chord to show me what position I am with regards to a pentatonic scale, and then expand the other two within the pentatonics, which is the next safest thing to do. So now I've got the C, D, E, G, and A, and then I can add the final two, which is F and B. These two often being the ones that are most likely to kind of clash in some cases if there's something weird going on, but you can add those. And then of course you can then think about, well, can I play something in the key of F while the chord changes happen? And you can start to mix that in. How could I do that? Well, you can try to look for where this position is now in the key of F. So I can move this up and say, what if I move this up to right there? Now I'm playing this same position in an F. So when the chord change moves to F, I can then say, okay, now I'm going to try to arpeggiate maybe the F shape here, which is now, the F notes, which is in the C shape. I can just arpeggiate the C shape in that case, or I can use this to expand to my pentatonic scale or basically my major scale. So that's how you can use these points to anchor. And again, different guitarists are going to have different ways to kind of talk about where they are at different points in the neck, because again, the notes are going to be repeated all over the neck. And the more conventions that you can kind of understand, the more ways that you understand them, the better you understand the fretboard and the better you can talk to other people.